then art is everywhere, all around us. And before art was a word in our language, it was how we lived. But somehow we've separated it out and lost ourselves to think, oh, the arts isn't part of who I am. It's for those people, the talented over there.
Right.
Right? So we're having some good conversations as we study this book, and in the end, the flourishing, because if our community is always engaged in arts and ensconced and surrounded by the joy of what that means in the making and the partaking, the consuming and the provision of it, then we're flourishing. So, yeah.
And I love how something you were saying just triggered this image in my mind of it. What you said about, it used to be, or there was a time where if you had a lot of art, you were considered wealthy, and that it's more than just what's hanging on the wall, but the environments you're coming through. Mm-hmm. And I get a distinct sense that most people, when they walk through a space, when they experience a space, they right away can determine if they feel valued in that space by how the space is designed. It comes across. It's almost intrinsic in the experience of the space.
Mm-hmm. And I got chills because that's why you're here. That's the conversation that we want to have.
Welcome back to our last episode of 2023. As you listen in, consider your surrounding area. Whether you're listening while you walk, while you exercise, while you ride the train, or in your car, or in your home office or kitchen, today our table invites you to take in the place where you are and take up the space as each element resonates with you. This episode welcomes Santa Ana Unified School District's Director of Facilities and Planning, Jeremy Kogan, to the conversation about learning environments and how the arts impact our spaces to help those within the space flourish. Listen in on how each collaboration, interaction, and life experience impacts how spaces are developed, decorated, and determined, and consider how might the space around you influence your own learning, creativity, curiosity, and moments of awe. Let's join the conversation.
Defining myself is like confining myself. So I undefined myself to find myself. They say a goldfish will only get as big as its bowl, but when you put it in a tank, the space can change the way it grows. It needs to have the room or its potential doesn't show, so its environment's essential for unleashing the unknown. These walls are keeping people out and keeping people in. I guess it's good to know where someone ends and someone else begins, but our boundaries become prisons when we see what could have been. The biggest goldfish ever measured 18 inches, snout to fin. So what we're seeing is we're trying to create a giant goldfish bowl, bigger and bigger and bigger for our kids, our community, all those spaces and places. And you, as our director in facilities, who has really been around a ton of initiatives to create beautiful spaces, learning, communing spaces in our district, have an influence and impact on helping our goldfish to flourish. How big can they become?
Right.
That's what we want to see.
Well, I think when the pandemic hit, we all realized our spaces.
Yes, we did.
Really intimately, and what worked. I mean, I remember when we went into distance learning, figuring out the lighting of like, can't put the computer there. Can't put where can I sit? Where can I stretch out? How can I stand? Yeah. That's where we got standing desks. And we figured out the best place or ways to work, to live, to grow.
Yeah.
And then that's when a lot of people started remodeling their homes.
Or selling them.
We all had to become practitioners of space, right? Because when you're here, when you're at a school district office or a school facility, there's someone else who's maybe done the work to think about that. But when you're at home, there is no one else. And suddenly you find, oh, this doesn't work because maybe I have a son or daughter in the other room and they're on a Zoom and I'm on a Zoom. And suddenly all these things with sound and space and comfort and temperature, we have to solve them ourselves. So we get really into it.
When it comes to space, the simple definition is a boundless three-dimensional extent in which objects and events occur and have relative position and direction. But the real magic is how objects and events occur within the space that creates a sense of place. Getting creative with how a space can house multiple events and experiences, and considering the variability of all who can commune within four walls or three-dimensional area is the trick. Getting to the point of creating such a space is where the story comes in.
I mean, basically everything is four walls, right? And so if we really, if I looked at, what I do every day, it's like, okay, I'm going to design this square and that square and that square. So, and if the people you're working with, if they try to get the job done, just basically to do the easiest possible work and maybe not really dive too deep in it, each square is going to start to look like every other square, and you're going to sort of just keep it simple. And and there are plenty of reasons why maybe we need consistency and standards and simplicity, but the fun in doing all this is when you really get to say, okay, let's make this space exceptional because it needs to be, in order for, say, the goldfish in that space to get more out of it than they would have otherwise gotten.
Do you want to describe some of the spaces that you've considered in recent projects that the district has embarked on to modernize, and the intent behind the spaces that we've been creating? Do you have an example?
Yeah. A few years ago we were working on a modernization project at Garfield Elementary School. And so one of the things, we have such tremendous creative energy, but we have realistic budget constraints. We cannot do everything, and we have to really, at the end of the day, be responsible to the taxpayer and to those that are investing in these spaces. And so Garfield had limited space to work with, but they really wanted a STEAM lab for students to experiment in arts and science and technology and so forth. And the space that was available was right at their library. And what we saw right away was, it kind of gets into this conversation we were just having about, at home with Zoom, you have sound in different places and they're competing. Well, how do you have a quiet study space in the library and perhaps a noisy STEAM lab in the same basic envelope of facility? And we were able to find a product that works pretty well, which is basically, think of it as a room divider. It's a wall that can be moved open and closed, and it can be done automatically with the press of a button. But what makes the wall really special is that it has a really good sound attenuation between the sides. And so when the wall is in the closed position, you can have quiet reflection in the library, and you can have a group of students doing some sort of STEAM lab activity. And it's glass, so you can see right through it. So supervision becomes easy to address. And now you've basically turned one space into two. And space is really expensive. Things can be $700 to $1,000 per square foot of space. So now we've created these two spaces without having to build a new building somewhere. And so we've done that cost effectively. And the other thing we find is that these kind of dividing walls, when they were done at schools years and years ago, they never got used because they were so difficult for just, let's say, a teacher to use or a principal to use. It required a maintenance request. It required, a whole team to move the wall open and closed. Well, this system, you press a button, and that button, the wall comes down with its own mechanical system. So we worked on that project with Dr. Braun and the team at Garfield, and it was kind of the first time we had done it. We've done it again at Jefferson Elementary School with Miss Roque and her staff there. And we'll see. I think that the long-term test is asking the users, returning back and saying, hey, how did this work out for you now? We've sort of created two spaces out of one. And on the one hand, there could be those that say, well, I really wish we had been able to have the extra, several $1 million to build two dedicated facilities instead of combining them into one. But maybe over time they'll say, well, it works, and now we can do it, and we can have our separate spaces, but we can, we can open and close this as needed.
And I love that because it's such a model of getting creative. That's what we have to do as artists, is who we are at our core, and that looks like many things. Your collaboration with the sites and your background.
Yeah.
We really want to uncover the intersections of design and art and the creativity that's vested in all of us, but how do we surface it in our need for humaning in the workspace?
How do you approach design when it comes to these four walls?
Yeah.
It's cold, right? You come in and it's four blank white walls.
Yeah.
And then you, through creative thought of the end user, how are these kids going to interact in this space?
Yeah. There's something I remember, I think I picked this up over the years from designers at Apple. And, in terms of the way they approach design of products. The design is not just how it functions, but how it feels to the users. I try to spend a lot of time working with our teams to envision what's it going to feel like to be in that space. What is it going to be if I'm let's say a teacher in that space? How am I going to use it? How am I going to operate it? What are my needs going to be? And I've been kind of blessed with maybe a unique perspective because I'm not a teacher. I've never been in that particular. I love teaching. I love those environments, but I've never been in those shoes directly. But indirectly, I come from this family of teachers. My parents are retired teachers. My brother's a high school science teacher. My cousin's a high school English teacher. My uncle's a retired teacher. I could go on. There's like another half dozen. And so if we have a family get together, the discussion is almost entirely like people's perspectives on being teaching. I'm the only one in the family who's not a teacher, right? Or I'm the only school administrator, you could say. And so, for better or worse, I've spent a lot of time in my life being on the receiving end, on the listening end, of teachers saying what's wrong with their schools, right? The things that bother them or irritate them. And so when I ended up finding myself in a facilities role and suddenly having a little bit of influence into maybe solving some of those problems.
Through the transformation of a forgotten historical space into a wellness center, we discover not only the power of reimagining our surroundings, but also the significance of holistic well-being. This prompts us to reflect on our own potential for transformation through human connection and humanity. In the realm of wellness centers, collaboration, creativity, and the essence of humanity combine to nurture every aspect of the whole person. Let's consider how the art of design fosters an environment where individuals come together, bridging emotional, physical, and intellectual dimensions to promote the well-being of students, schools, and communities alike. Let's listen in.
The other part on the Wellness Center for Garfield, that was such a neat endeavor to be part of because, and it was literally one of the first things when I came to Santa Ana Unified. I started here in 2018, and the building had been sort of abandoned for a generation. The district bought it in the 1990s because it was assembling parcels to build Garfield. And the deal at the time was, hey, you can have all these different parcels, but this building's going to kind of come with it. And when we look back at the records from, say, 30 or so years ago, there was quite a bit of influence to say, this is kind of in the way. Can we just get rid of this eyesore, this old building? And at the time, there was a board member and leader, Rob Richardson, who said, very clearly, this is a historical artifact of the community. And for those who know and who knew Rob, he was very he loved trains.
Mm-hmm.
He loved trains, and he loved that whole, kind of lore and history. And so, thankfully, he and others were able to say, no, do not demolish this. And so they did what they could at the time just to keep it structurally sound so that it wouldn't further degrade. It has its roots in the early 1900s, 1906 or so, I think. So other than some minor things to keep it structurally sound, it was used as a storage space for the last 30 so years.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't really anything functionally that was coming out of it, and so I'm really grateful. One of my first things when I got here, I was asked, can you take the lead and turn this into a wellness center? And that was such a cool idea for it, because while it doesn't meet the requirements we have now for classroom space,
Mm-hmm.
it is totally permissible, and it can be enhanced and restored as a wellness center space. And that meant kind of going on this process with a lot of people, experts in historical renovation and preservation, and bringing in a whole team on that, and also working very closely with the city of Santa Ana, because they have a very strong lead in historical renovation of architecture. And so we sort of had to slow it down. This was one of those where we had to slow down before you move fast.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we slowed down. We brought all the right people to the process, between architects and preservationists and city and district staff. And we outlined a process to restore the building, and just before COVID hit, we had that building open to the public, and now obviously in the aftermath since then, now it's being used all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I love the way communities were designed. I love the way you use transportation then as a side effect dictates the way in which a community might be more or less walkable.
Mm-hmm.
And so it tends to be, you look at this a lot in European urban design, maybe a lot more East Coast US urban design. The more a particular community started with a basis on trains for travel versus cars, the more walkable and human it is, the more it's built at a human scale. And so if you look at, say, downtown Santa Ana, the areas where some of these historic buildings are from, they're very much built on a human scale. You can walk from place to place. And at a human scale, you can start to appreciate art and architecture a whole lot more than if you're driving on the 5 at 60 miles an hour. At those kind of vehicular scales, you start to lose all of that. And things get further and further spread apart, and you see things like big box retail where just giant parking lots are separating the buildings, and there's nothing to make you feel connected into the environments.
Imagine spaces that not only educate, but also inspire wonder, curiosity, and the joy of discovery. That's the magic of learning landscapes. These innovative pedagogical tools take learning beyond traditional classrooms, making the most of learning by letting us learn, explore, and play outside of the traditional classroom. This concept is especially vital for kids in underserved communities. By blending the science of learning with urban design, they turn everyday places like bus stops, parks, and playgrounds into exciting learning opportunities that build a sense of community and pride. Think about it. How might the design of spaces elevate our sense of value, visibility, and confidence in learning through the power of play and curiosity?
Implemented and developed outdoor learning landscapes, first around the idea of a game called Fraction Ball. And Fraction Ball was a repainting of a basketball court, so that still remains a totally functional basketball court, but it gives the opportunity for educators to do an additional activity on that court around fractions. And the idea could be that the kids are playing and they're making their points with the basketball, but they have to add up fractions, and they don't get, I'm used to basketball where you you get 2 points or you get 3 points. They're nice, convenient whole numbers when it's 2 points or 3 points, right? But in fraction ball, you don't have that benefit. You might be getting a half or a third or 2/3, and then you have to figure out, well, I got 2/3, I need another third. And you're kind of in the midst of playing this game, working out these fractions and living the math.
Oof.
As opposed to just, classroom instruction.
Exactly. PE and math integration into an environment that influences your feeling about yourself too.
Sure. And the fact that the courts themselves are visually beautiful and striking,
Yes.
so there's kind of this art piece into it as well.
Yeah, the whole aesthetic experience is really important, which I think you're speaking to a lot, has an influence. One of the things we're thinking about is you're trying to help students feel really special. If you study what Disneyland does, they animate everything, right? So that,
Everything comes with a story.
Yeah.
and so what are some of the stories that we're thinking about when we're designing for kids?
Yeah. Well, and I'm I don't know, a lifelong, I like to pretend to be a Disney Imagineer. I think that probably that's a career I would have been well suited to if I didn't end up in education. Because they are trying to tell a story, they're trying to create an experience, they're interested in how you feel when you're in those spaces. When I go to Disneyland or if I go to an amusement park, I think it's really fun, obviously being there, but it's fun to really just study the looks on people's faces, particularly kids' faces. There's a certain expression, a certain wonderment that's on their face, and I ask myself, what is it about being on Main Street or kind of coming to that entrance? What is it about that generates that feeling for kids? Why do they feel that way? Is it just because they're going to eat a lot of junk food that day? I don't think so. I don't think it's just that. There's probably a lot of reasons, if you ask kids. But I like to think that something about the physical environment, the way the buildings are built, the way they're scaled to a human scale, and as a matter of fact, Disney famously scaled the buildings so that the proportions are really interesting. They are not as big as they need to be to look the height they are, right? So you look at a building and things at ground level are normal proportions, but as they get higher, they play visual tricks on you so that they didn't have to build 4-story buildings, but they might look that big. And it was all designed to kind of invite you to feel this sort of sense of curiosity and excitement for being there. So a little bit of that might find its way into some questions I ask when we're having meetings with designers, because if we could even get just an ounce of that in our schools, and especially if we can do it at the same cost, right? And I have to be mindful that everything I do, we are going to be expected by the public to do this cost effectively, and if we can do a little of that wonderment and that excitement and things that'll make kids feel that sense of value, that they're valued by their space, then why not? Because if it helps a teacher, because that student has now come into that school and they're just a little bit more excited to be there that day, or they feel a little more valued, that I think that's how I can contribute to education. I can help by the kids coming into the classroom ready to learn because they feel that environment.
You lower the affect filter. When you mix play, when you mix curiosity and wonder, you automatically tell a person, it's you're accepted.
Yeah.
This is where you should be.
Yeah.
And because you've jumped from that survival brain mode to a creative space mode, they want to do more.
Yeah.
And so my thing that I'm kind of wondering is, when it comes to involving students, staff, parents, and community members in the process of transforming these spaces, ensuring that they become vibrant centers of creativity, growth, and inspiration, how does your role contribute to reimagining and taking into consideration not only budgets, but also taking into consideration all the collaborations between PE, between the arts,
Yeah.
between math classes that are like, no, I just want I want white walls.
Right.
So I can write on all of them,
That's
all
right.
the equations.
That's right. Well, but even that, okay, let's use just that quick example of math. Did you hear what you just said? Write on all the walls. But in a lot of classrooms, do we give teachers the ability to write on all the walls?
Mm-mm.
No, we predetermine. We say, you can only write on this one wall. And by the way, we're only going to say that you can write on this 6 feet of this one wall, because or 6 feet or 8 feet of whiteboard is the only amount of board that we want to provide. And why do we provide only 8 feet of whiteboard? Well, because the standards 20 years ago was 8 feet of chalkboard. And why do we provide only 8 feet of chalkboard? Because in 1870, that's what they put in every classroom. But getting to the modern environment, if you're a math teacher, you might enjoy being able to do exercises and group activities and movement around the classroom where every wall, 360 degrees around the classroom, is whiteboard. Why not?
Or glass.
Or
I mean,
glass,
I see
yeah.
activities happening on glass.
Yeah.
Imagine a process where the end users themselves, including students, actively participate in shaping the spaces they learn and grow in. It's not just about surveys and feedback forms. It's about harnessing the power of imagination and visualizing what their dream learning spaces could become. As we listen in on how this innovative approach, fueled by creative communication, has revolutionized the way schools design their future, putting students' voices at the forefront of the process by looking at a different way visualizing a space can support all who engage within the space.
Having our teachers at every school be able to weigh in through surveys. And one of the ways we structured surveys was to talk about the different parts of our school facilities and to sort of compartmentalize them and say, okay, we've got classrooms, and we've got multipurpose rooms, and we've got playgrounds, and we've got administration, office space. Each one, we wanted to know independently from one of the other. What do people feel about those spaces? How well do they judge the quality of the space currently, and how high is the priority to improve it? And so you can get a sense, you can kind of tease out the data and get a sense of what is the most important part of our campuses from the perspective of teachers and staff members and parents and community members. And we wanted to do the same thing with students too, and make sure that students at every school site were part of this process. And we also wanted to do it in a way that visually or graphically, whether you're in kindergarten or in a senior in high school, how do we ask the same question across that whole age span, right? How do we survey them? Because we across all different types of adults, you can just use one survey. So we came up with something that the team put together, and it basically is this gigantic poster board, 5 feet wide, and a series of images on it. And we gave the opportunity for kids at every school and every grade level to put stickers on those images that they felt were the biggest priorities for their school. And so we're in the process of kind of digesting all of that now, all of that data. But we've done this before, and so I'm going to share another example where we've done almost a very similar activity, and now we actually got to celebrate it recently. We did this for a specific project at Madison Elementary School, for example. And at Madison Elementary School, we had a project to build a new playground for the early education students, kindergarten and TK and the like. And several years ago, before we got through the design process, we had all of the kids at the school also see a similar set of images, and there were, 32 images or something like this. But each image was a specific part of a playground. So a slide might have been in one image, and another image could be a climbing structure, and another one could be a spinning, a spinning merry-go-round thing, right? So all of the kids were given stickers, and they were able to pick which playground items that were the most important to them. Well, we just had a grand opening of this. We had a ribbon cutting ceremony of this playground, and we invited the community, and our board members spoke, and leadership spoke. And I was looking at the pictures on my phone of the kids voting on these playground structures, and then I looked around me, and I looked at all the actual things that were built, and what the kids chose is what we actually built. So this was a case where voice and choice, the kids actually got to pick their playground, and the architects and design team members responded directly to each of these inputs. And it doesn't always get to work out in such a one-for-one, relationship, but it was so fulfilling to be able to see that the kids told us exactly what they like to play on, and they got exactly that in their playground. So
I love that. I went to some listening sessions a couple of years ago that our superintendent was leading for the district, and listened to the kids, and even the kids in high school who were at a school that was a converted elementary. They had a swing set and a playground. They loved to be on it.
Yes.
And I was like, yes, let's get playgrounds everywhere. Let's have playgrounds at the district office, swing sets.
Yeah.
I would love to have a staff meeting that way, or have a hard conversation while we're, playing together in a way, because it does help build that connection to have the play and the engagement and the joyfulness, and improves the environment so much.
And it changes maybe the attitude you come into a discussion with. It changes maybe your state of being. You might be more calm, you might be willing to be more vulnerable. So you can have totally different conversations. Maybe we should have staff meetings at an amusement park.
When it comes to your surrounding space, consider how the area might give you a sense of place. In this way, this conversation looks to establish a sense of place by sharing an experience or description of similar emotions that are felt universally. Our experiences help us make meaning of our environments, both natural and built. So it only makes sense that our communal areas, such as a school building, would also be created to provide any who enter a sense of place by carrying meaning, memories, culture, and as such, establish a community amongst the many who enter. Places that bring out the very essence of being human through dance, music, theater, story, visuals, media. The arts hold a special space for many to share in connecting with ourselves and with each other. Take, for example, the beginning of a show as the orchestra pit warms up. The curtains have yet to be pulled back. The audience finds their seats, and a quiet hush begins as the lights dim, awaiting magic to begin on that stage. A curiosity. How might this approach to designing spaces in schools where diverse individuals can find a sense of belonging and community impact the way we perceive and interact with our learning environment?
If we're there, my wife has to drag me away from the bands because if the band is playing, I just am mesmerized. I just want to sit there or stand there and listen to this, band playing and whatever classic, soundtracks they're playing from Disney songs. There's something about live music that is so, we all have, some version of that, right? The other thing you mentioned, the awe for these spaces, and so my other little secret. I don't think I've really told this to many people, but one of the perks, if you will, of being a director in the facilities division is you could go to any facility in the district, right, and appreciate it. If I ever happen to be at Santa Ana High School, and if a meeting, after a meeting is over, before I make my way back to the office, if I have a few minutes, I almost always just go into the auditorium, go into the theater at Santa Ana High School, and usually it's empty, and I just stand there for a moment, and I just kind of just breathe. I don't know what it is about that space, but there's just something that it just kind of gives you that awe-inspiring feeling. So when it comes to these spaces, and you're talking about different types of theaters and different types of productions. I know that, even though I might not be able to, participate in that artistry myself, because, maybe I'm coming at it from, I don't have the experience of being in acting, or I don't have the experience of being, I'm just an amateur musician. I'm not, I don't have that skill set. Probably because I just haven't practiced it. My flute is collecting dust.
Right.
But as a person who has had opportunities to appreciate the arts, and you see these performances, and you just are so impressed by how did they do it, and how did they, like you said, you don't get to see every single practice, and you don't get to see every bit of what's happening in the orchestra pit, but that it has taken people months and years and decades of their life
Yes.
to prepare for that moment.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
My wife and I were on a cruise with our family it was about a year ago, and the performance even on the ship was just like, wow, here we are at sea,
Mm-hmm.
but this whole theater that they've assembled, and one of the things, it got me really excited about what we're doing at Valley High School, because I noticed that a lot of what they were relying on at sea, because they didn't have the ability to have a bunch of constructed wooden set pieces,
Mm-hmm.
they had a giant LED backdrop,
Mm-hmm.
and everything was programmed, and some of it was three-dimensional in that backdrop. And I remember asking some people questions, because I was curious. I wanted to kind of, okay, what can I I know I'm just a guest on this ship, but can I steal some ideas and bring it back with me to Santa Ana? And to see how they were using all of this sort of digital set pieces, and it was so immersive. And you'd sit there and you'd feel, at one moment they're having a scene at night, and there's they were doing Mamma Mia, the musical, and they're out there at night, and the moon is kind of lighting the stage, and it's a giant LED screen, and it's a digital moon, but you really easily can forget about the technology. Mm-hmm. The technology is not what you're noticing. You're noticing the mood that it's setting, and the way that lighting and that backdrop and those set pieces make you feel in the space. So most of where I may be crossing over between facilities design and the arts is sort of, first of all, coming from a place of just appreciation. Like, I love being in the audience for these types of things, and from time to time when I've been fortunate enough to go out and see these performances. Another one I'm thinking of right now, several years ago we went to see Hamilton at the Pantages, and oh my gosh, I mean, first of all, even before the performance started, you're just sitting there mesmerized by the Pantages, because it's this space that just has been created to set a certain state of mind when you walk in the door. So can we provide these experiences for our kids here in Santa Ana? Can we provide that same feeling when they walk in the door? And on top of that, for those that are really interested in the arts, can we provide the kind of career development so that if they want to go and work in Broadway or Pantages, or maybe they want to get a job on the cruise ship, maybe they want to do entertainment in all these other settings, what will their resume say they experienced in our district? And if we can design facilities now that are at equity with what is out there in the workplace, how does that give a student in our district an edge?
The whole time, I think it's hilarious that you said I get to design boxes for a living in a cool way.
Right.
And yet, with these boxes, you've brought in so much life experience of everything that you see, that you've created a community not only for yourself, but for our end users, our students, our parents, our teachers, our community. And I find how you've bridged the gap between language, between space, and you've created a place where people can come in and share
Yeah.
and be
Yeah.
and grow and learn.
Yeah. Well, and I just thought of an image in my mind when you're talking about the boxes, because we're in the holiday season right now and Christmas is only a few days away, right? We don't give boxes to our children that are just brown, boring boxes. We wrap them, we decorate them, we apply art to the boxes, and then it really creates that reaction that we're hoping for. Right, so there's almost a little interesting analogy there. I never thought about that until you just said it.
And also, boxes are fish tanks.
Yes, that's
So
true.
let's grow these fish tanks
Yeah.
and create beautiful ones
Yeah,
for our students to become as big as they possibly can and want to be.
yeah.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode that asks every listener to take a moment to take in their space and find their place. Until next time, thanks for joining the conversation.
And so kind of I see a real need early in the design process to say, well, what if?